Oh, that's a good one. Did you see that picture? It was like
No.
it was an erect penis with an eagle on it.
Oh.
But it only came up on the safe search. All right. This is episode 9.
Yeah.
It is?
No.
All right. What's going on, everybody? This is episode 9 of the Blood Feud podcast. I'm Neil.
I'm Master Chief. What's up?
Today we're talking about a movie called Green Inferno, directed by one Eli Roth.
And we felt that this movie needed a second, kind of like a devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Well,
We're just going to be talking, it's pretty much, we're just, like I've got a script pulled up from the last episode, and we're just going to be rereading it.
I don't know. I just feel like this movie deserves more attention.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to probably start going on the road and campaigning it for Oscars, I think.
Eli Roth,
Best director.
for president, honestly, is what I would say.
Eli Roth, Bernie Sanders, 2K17.
Who's the VP? Is Bernie the VP?
Bernie, yeah.
Okay, obviously.
Yeah. Actually, it should just be Eli Roth and a clone of Eli Roth. Okay. All right. This is episode 9. We're going to be talking about Bone Tomahawk today.
Bone Tomahawk. If it sounds ridiculous, you've got the right idea.
It's not that ridiculous. There's a couple parts. But the title's a little ridiculous. The movie...
I think there's a definite comedic tone.
Yeah.
To the movie.
There's a little hint of black comedy in there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. We can talk about that more as we get into it, but with some of the characters. And I think if you think the title's ridiculous, I think it's kind of supposed to be. This is, after all, a Western horror.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more of a Western. I think it's much more of a Western.
It's 90% Western.
90%, which I was not expecting. I was delightfully surprised, though, by the result.
Yeah,
honestly.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not... Obviously, there's not really a whole lot of Western movies that come out anymore, but I'm not really versed on Westerns. But are there any horror Westerns? I just Googled it. Oh, Gala Walkers, which came out a couple of years ago, that had Wesley Snipes in it.
Burrowers, that looks like a ripoff of Tremors.
Right, yeah. So
Actually,
there's been some stuff. Ravenous is one, I guess, that I've heard of. Anyways.
Relatively unexplored, I would say.
Yeah.
And, I'm not too well-versed with Westerns either. Wesley Snipes.
With Wesley Snipes and Westerns.
Total TM. No, he's P90X, isn't he?
P90X?
Who's P90X?
I don't know. Are you talking about the Tybo guy?
I'm talking about Bone Tomahawk.
We're talking about Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah, I'm not really too familiar. I mean, True Grit was the last one I saw.
Me too.
This movie, nothing like it, but, just the idea of a dark Western. This movie kind of did remind me of a Coen Brothers kind of vibe.
It's got some stuff in there.
Which was True Grit, the remake. And, that's about it. I want to talk about this director for a second because this is his debut feature film. Craig Zahler.
He wrote a film that I had heard of, but I'd never seen.
Oh, the Black. I'm gonna find it. The Black Asylum.
Yeah, and the power goes out in the asylum.
The Incident is what it's called. As it turns out, he has written several Western novels. The most famous of which being 2010's A Congregation of Jackals. As you already know, no, nobody's gonna know that. But apparently he's kind of a respected Western author. Did I do it again?
Yeah.
Western author, at least in that regard. But this is his first film. Filmed in 21 days, did you say?
Yeah, 21 days on a budget of $1.8 million. To put that in perspective, the average Game of Thrones episode cost $6 whole million.
Stone cold dollars.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, dude. Shout out to all my wrestling fans.
Right. And in California at a ranch, that's where it was filmed.
That's pretty... it's pretty impressive when you consider, one, some of the effects in the film, and just, it's a good movie. Yeah. And for it to be made in that short a time for that little money, that's impressive.
Yeah, I think there are hearing that it's definitely what am I trying to say here? You can tell that it was filmed on a lower budget because going back to sound of the almost complete absence of any soundtrack whatsoever.
Yeah, there's a couple parts, but yeah, it's mostly nothing, and I think that's pretty cool. Cool.
Anyway, and that was one of my favorite things about the movie. Watching it is that I realized there's almost no, and it took me like an hour and a half into the movie to realize, oh, there are some parts where there's a little bit of orchestration going on, but I thought that it makes it feel very like barren.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other reasons that I think the sound design is interesting, because there's a lot of like Foley effects that I think are really good, like the horses. There's a lot of very visceral Foley effects, like people getting cut open. And, I don't want to say too much, but
yeah.
Those speak for themselves, and they're not, and even the moments of suspense are very interesting because there's not really music to garner them. There's actually, as we'll talk about, a very ominous diegetic sound that kind of signals something ominous coming, and I don't want to give it away. Diegetic just meaning it's part of the film and it's not
like a soundtrack,
an externally added soundtrack. Very cool. So what we're going to do, as always, is kind of talk spoiler-free. We've already been kind of talking, but about our thoughts. To give you an idea of, I think, why you should watch this movie.
I recommend it.
It came out in September, very recent, very hot.
Well, that was like its festival debut. It came out like on video on demand, I think, in late October. So it's new. Yeah. This is new. This could be the newest, well, I guess not the newest. Well, maybe the newest movie we've talked about.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I mean, Green Inferno was
Well, that was, they put it on hold for like a year.
Yeah.
I mean, Crimson Peak. But...
And I just wanna make note of how stacked this lineup is as far as actors.
The cast is definitely one of the best parts of this. There's 4 main characters, and like their dynamics are just really good, and like all the characters, the individual characters that are being portrayed are really good.
We have Kurt Russell as Sheriff Franklin Hunt, one of the main characters.
Yeah, I would say there's 4 main characters.
Yeah. Which, well, the film does a great job of balancing those 4 characters. We'll talk about that. We've got the Patrick Wilson, who maybe not too prolific, but if you've seen Insidious, if you've seen The Conjuring,
second season of Fargo.
Yep, the second season of Fargo, and what else is
he wasn't in The Conjuring? Oh yeah, he was in The Conjuring.
He was the he was the paranormal.
I thought he was the dad, but he was in Watchmen too. He was the Night Owl.
Okay, and he is Arthur O'Dwyer, who is kind of a cowboy who has been injured.
Yep.
He's a roofer. He was doing a roofing job, and his leg was totally...
his tibula,
right?
Yeah,
he fell off, I believe. And he's bedridden for 14 weeks, I believe, which isn't going to happen, but we'll talk about that later. He is forced to stay home with his wife, she's the other protagonist.
Sarah O'Dwyer, or Samantha O'Dwyer. Her name is Lily Simmons.
Yeah, Lily Simmons. There we go. We have Matthew Fox, and I do want to say Lily Simmons, his wife, is not really one of the 4 main characters.
No.
She is cast as one of the leads, and I don't really understand that.
No, we'll talk about that.
Matthew Fox, who he's on Supernatural.
He's on Supernatural?
I think so.
He's in Lost. He was in Lost. He was in World War Z for a minute.
Okay.
He was in... That's really all I know him from, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Matthew Fox.
I know him from Lost. That's what I know him from.
Yeah, he plays a
Speed Racer. He was in Speed Racer. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, that movie. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then...
So Matthew Fox is... Oh, are you still looking at his...
Yeah, no, he plays kind of like a mysterious background.
He's like a woman. He's like the town womanizer.
Yeah,
but also like he's killed a lot of Indians.
Right.
Is his thing. Yeah, and Patrick Wilson's character, Arthur O'Dwyer, doesn't like Matthew Fox, John Bruder.
Mm-hmm. They kind of got a little bit of a rivalry, I guess.
And then the last character, his name is Chicory in the film.
He's like the second in command sheriff.
Yeah,
what is
he's
he?
the backup deputy.
Backup deputy. That's it.
That's not what they call him. It's the
second deputy or
it's something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's the. We'll find it.
And he's played by Richard Jenkins.
I'm not too familiar.
He's in Cabin in the Woods.
Oh.
Yeah, and he's the dad from Step Brothers. I totally did not recognize him. I had to look it up because I was like, who is this? Like, this is a very good performance, and I wanted
he's one
to
of
see
my
who
favorite
it was.
characters in this movie.
I think, because like we'll talk about that later.
Phenomenal.
I think that's a question we have to ask: is who is your favorite?
And I want to spend a lot of time talking about these characters because this is a movie. The reason I think it's so phenomenal is because it isn't afraid to spend the majority of its time with these characters and developing them. And even literally the first 40 minutes of this film most of the film is character
it's almost like because this is the longest movie we've ever talked about.
Yeah,
it's 2 hours and 12 minutes.
Yep.
And Jinx.
I'm not buying you shit. The first 40 minutes they're in town. They're in the first town.
Right. And then the next 40 minutes are kind of them walking, really.
And it's very reminiscent of like the Fellowship of the Ring. And if that sounds, they're just traveling and as in a cowboy movie or a western, you're spending a lot of time traveling on the road. Anyway, and so in that way it feels authentic, but also another thing that impressed me significantly in this movie is the dialogue. I think
there were a couple lines that I was like, it sounds okay, but it's kind of cheesy. But on the opposite end of that, there was a line at the end of this movie.
Oh my gosh, we'll talk about it.
That was like my favorite line in any movie like ever.
I think it. I don't know if we're talking about the same one, but it was like almost a tearjerker. Yeah, man.
Dude, I was like, this is because like people are like, oh, this is my favorite line in a movie.
Yeah.
I'm not really one of those people, but I was like. No. That was really good.
Yeah, very. There were a couple scenes in this movie that I felt very emotional at, and that just shows how powerful the writing is. I think there's definitely places. Patrick Wilson's character didn't really impress me too much. I think his dialogue might have been the weakest. I'm not saying it was bad.
I'm going to disagree with you on that.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
That his wife.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm talking about of the four main characters.
Okay.
There's almost like a gap between Patrick Wilson's like actual dialect too and his wife's dialect because Patrick Wilson takes on this very cowboyish.
I'm gonna see. I think the wife was like the worst part of this movie.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying like she was not. It seemed like she was a little bit more out of character.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were saying it the other way.
No. Patrick Wilson was, he adopted this accent, which it didn't really fully convince me until maybe halfway through the film. I felt like he was doing a better job. Toward the beginning of the film, it seems like he's trying to put on a very cowboyish.
See, that's what I was going to say. Like, none of the characters really have like a howdy partner.
Right.
Like, it seems like very realistic take on the Old West. Matthew Fox's character, I think his voice and his accent or whatever, however you would say, I think that was like my favorite one.
Yeah, and honestly, Kurt Russell's character.
Kurt Russell's just a genius, though. To be honest, I mean,
I don't have the knowledge.
He's classic.
He was in Sky High. That movie kind of sucks.
He was in Escape from New York, Escape from LA. I mean, it's Kurt Russell. It's Kurt.
I want to say
it's Mr. Russell. No, it's Kurt Vogel Russell. Born in March 17th, 1951, Springfield, Massachusetts, USA. It's Kurt. Nominated for 1 Golden Globe. That's not enough to me.
What was it for? What was the Golden Globe?
How could I forget The Thing and Grindhouse? Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
Let me get for Kurt Russell. Oh yeah. Boom, baby.
Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell, and the what I wanted to say was that all of the writing.
The Golden Globe that he was nominated for was a picture called Silkwood.
Okay, that's not what I was going to say, but thank you.
His mustache in this film, his mustache is amazing, and it's probably real, to be honest with you.
Well, I don't see why they would make it not real. I don't see how you can do that.
You can do, like, fake beards.
No. I'm talking about integrity. I'm talking about integrity as a director.
Oh.
You can't fake a mustache.
Especially one like this. This is just beauty. Beauty personified. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh. This is such a fucked up episode.
The writing.
The writing.
This is an original script by the director.
Mm-hmm.
I lost the name.
It's
I've got Bone Tomahawk on all tabs. All my tabs are Bone Tomahawk.
Bone Tomahawk on the mind. As Craig Zahler.
Right. He wrote this script. Like, I assume there was probably a little bit of editing, but he just wrote a script and handed it to these actors.
I think I read on the IMDb trivia, which IMDb trivia is not, the end all be all for facts, but the first draft of the script is what they used in the movie.
And I'm astounded because the dialogue, especially for Kurt Russell, and maybe there's some of his own little touches happening. It's so minimalistic, and it's not annoying. It's not. I didn't feel like it was very cheesy most of the time. I agree that sometimes it did feel a little cornball status.
And maybe that's because it was the first draft. Maybe if they would have done a couple more, it would have been perfect.
Yeah.
But
I really appreciate, and there's so much quirkiness, and
mostly with the Chicory character
for sure. But the way that this character his memory isn't good. His wife is dead, and he kind of visits her randomly and brings her flower. He's very faithful, but he's asking these weird questions.
Yeah, let's not talk about it because that's I think that deserves its own little segment.
Well, there's just scenes like in the beginning of the movie where he's playing checkers with somebody, and it's just the film does a great job of immersing its viewers in the world and making it feel authentic and like it's taking time to develop. I think some people will be turned off because this movie is long.
It's long, yeah.
And a lot of it is build up.
It requires a commitment. I know. I think 40 minutes in, I was like, because it wasn't what I was expecting. But the last 30 minutes, 40 minutes definitely make up for it. I do feel like they could have cut maybe 20 minutes of it or repositioned where they put the 20 minutes.
It loses some steam for sure.
Yeah, in that middle
around
ground.
the middle part.
Yep.
It's a little fat around the middle. But it also through this kind of lengthy journey,
girthy. Yeah,
it conveys this journey that I don't know. It's all about themes of loneliness and isolation and companionship, and it's weird territory for a horror movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is why when you look at a title like Bone Tomahawk and you're confused.
I was definitely expecting it to be more action packed.
Yeah, me too.
With the title like Bone Tomahawk, but
it reminded me of a movie like True Grit where you've got mostly build up and the only action is at the end.
But it's good action. So I think we're both pretty positive on this movie. I'd recommend it.
Yep.
I think if you're a horror fan and you're not into westerns, you might hate the movie for the first hour. But I said, I think the last 40 minutes makes up for it. I think if you're a western fan, I think you'll enjoy it. I think if you just like good movies.
There are a couple excessively violent scenes that I thought were brilliant, but if you're really not into the gore, you might want to skip out on this one because the end is extremely violent, brutally violent. Some of the most violent things I've seen in any movies we've done so far.
Oh yeah, which is saying something.
I think my jaw was literally open for one scene for 2 minutes.
Yeah, and I think it's probably because there's kind of this dichotomy where with Western movies you've seen before, you might get a scalping scene, but it's mostly just shootouts, bang, you're dead. Yeah. Where, you don't associate this time period with the brutality that you see in this movie,
right?
I don't know, at least for me. Oh, and another thing I want to say before we jump into spoilers is there's a lot of parts of the film that feel like you're watching a theater, a stage performance.
Oh, I
where
agree.
The camera kind of pulls out, and it's a long shot, and it stays static for a second, and you see these characters kind of move around within.
That's really cool. I didn't think.
And you kind of just you zoom up to see reaction shots, but there's not a whole lot of camera movement. It's very I could see this being done as a stage play.
Yeah, and even one of the first scenes is just a static shot of the town, and that's when I started noticing a lot of these shots are static, and it kind of reminded me of not at all like him, but how Wes Anderson will do these static shots
Right.
that kind of cut and shift around, and that kind of thing. This movie's gorgeous. It feels like it exists in its own world. If you have the time to spend and if you have the patience, I think it's a very rewarding and fun movie to watch.
I recommend it for sure.
I highly recommend it, and it's probably going to be one of my favorites of the year. I think.
Yeah,
I think
it could be up there.
I do think it's got some flaws for me, at least, and it's underwhelming in some aspects. But as a whole, I really like this movie. So without further ado, let's jump into it. We're not going to do a full play-by-play because this movie's so long.
Right. A lot of it doesn't even warrant itself to play-by-play because it's just like walking dialogue.
Which is why I compare it to The Fellowship of the Ring, because that book is all about, let's go here, let's talk to these people, let's go here. And this one's more
and that's not a bad thing.
No.
Yeah.
But, some people who want their payoff quicker might, and that's fine if you do want that, but this is not the movie for you. So, let's just talk about the opening scene of this movie.
Yeah, with
I love this scene.
David Arquette and Sid Haig, who I thought were going to have, bigger roles, but that's not exactly the case.
Yeah, I really love the way this movie opens.
So I knew going into the movie that it was about like a group of cannibals and them having to go rescue some people from them. And when we first see these characters, Buddy and the other guy's name is Purvis, but he
David
takes
Arquette
on the name Buddy.
Purvis.
When we first see these guys, it's like I thought these were going to be the cannibals. You know what I mean? Because they're bigger name actors. Not bigger. They're like, they're known actors.
Yeah.
And, I was kind of expecting something like that. It turns out that these guys are going to be the first victims of the cannibals.
And we've got a fun scene. The first thing we see in the movie is David Arquette cutting someone's throat.
Oh, yeah.
Very brutal.
Yep.
Very cool.
I thought the dialogue in this part was just great. Like, because, they've cut a series of people's throats, and one of them...
They're robbing people, killing them and robbing them.
Right.
And it's not David Arquette, but Buddy, who is...
Sid Haig.
Sid Haig is telling him, this guy kind of wakes back up, and Sid Haig has to shoot him in the face, and he's like, you gotta cut all 16 major veins, or something like that.
And this part had some of my favorite dialogue in the film because he shoots the gun and they hear like this whistling, howling noise.
Right, and it's really creepy. I almost want to play it.
Yeah, go ahead and play it. Go ahead and play it.
No, they don't hear it there. It's
Well, I thought because he hears something and he says
they hear horses, so they run into this canyon. They're like, "We gotta go." And David Arquette is very apprehensive about going into this valley. We learn that it's called the Valley of the Starving Man.
But I just wanted to say some of the dialogue, some of the lines. I thought, hold on, go ahead and play that.
Is that us?
Hold on.
They hear footsteps, I think.
Someone's in the other direction. Well, it's here now. Get. If that was a Gus. Riders coming in from one way and savages the other. You want to go back there? Go. If that was a Gus, then it learned.
So you can hear there's kind of this. It sounds kind of orchestral.
It sounds like wolves howling.
Yeah, like a howl, like a moaning. And this is what I'm talking about with that diegetic sound. That it's creepy. It's like a banshee moan or something, and it has a very interesting root. But this is the signal that the cannibals have spotted something, which is our victims here.
And I just want to talk about it's mostly Buddy's lines here.
Yeah.
But he says right there, if that was the wind, then it learned an instrument.
Yeah.
And like earlier, he shoots the gun and he's like, do you think they heard us? He says like a bat in China could have heard us.
Yeah.
And there's another, when he's talking about the cutting the arteries, he's like, well, how do you know how many arteries there are? He's like, my uncle had an acquaintance with a man who was trained as a doctor.
Yeah,
like,
it's so funny.
It's like
ridiculous.
this kind of like, it seems authentic, I guess.
Yeah. Very goofy. And he in the end of this scene, the way that these cannibals are presented, at first is very spooky. They walk through this. They're in this valley, and they walk through this like ritual circle, a burial.
We
site.
should talk about. Is that what it is? It's a burial, site. Yeah, okay.
And so they're walking through, and David Arquette's spooked, and he knows they shouldn't be there. And then we see a shot of their faces as they're walking forward. So we're moving backward, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then, not David Arquette, Buddy
Sid
Haig takes an arrow in the throat.
Yeah.
And he's like, ugh. And then he pulls it out of his throat, and he's like, he's bleeding through his mouth. And David Arquette kind of starts to run backward. And then, as David Arquette, we have another shot from behind both David Arquette and Sid Haig. And now, only for the first time, we didn't see a cannibal come up in a shot, but now as we see this shot, there's like a dark figure
shadowy.
cutting, like gutting Sid.
Yeah.
And
that was pretty awesome.
The way it happens is weird because there's nothing in the shot, and then as the camera cuts to a different shot, the cannibal's just up.
It does
Sid
that a
Haig's
lot
face.
too throughout the film,
Yeah.
where the cannibals kind of just pop in, and I think that's probably to show just like how good of hunters they are. You know
It
what
also
I mean?
makes them seem supernatural,
right.
And I don't want to say anything about that yet, but throughout the whole film, with these banshee calls that they do, with the way they just appear like ghosts, it makes them seem very supernatural.
Yeah.
There's a very cool tone about their characters,
Right.
which
And
I
like
think
with
is
the way
very
they're
well
presented
done.
too, like their actual physical appearance.
And then David Arquette will trip over a rock, and a skull will fall off the top of like a pyre, or a cairn is what they're called. These
Yeah.
stacks of stones, and then a skull hits the ground, and then Bone Tomahawk runs. And it's just a really cool opening sequence.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's ominous,
Definitely caught me off guard.
And again, the director is doing a very good job of making a simple idea like savages in the like Indians seem very otherworldly.
Yes.
Seem very alien, like it. And for the next 30 minutes, we meet the characters and spend time with them in town.
Right. You kind of you get accustomed to who O'Dwyer is and who Bruder.
Mr. Bruder, who is Matthew Fox. He's kind of the womanizer, Indian killer, and Bright Hope is the name of the town.
Yeah.
We meet Patrick Wilson. He's stuck with his wife at home, and he's just bummed because he can't work anymore. He's got to sit at home. He's kind of figuring out what it's like to be a housewife because now he has to wait for his wife, who is a doctor, and ends up having to go perform surgery. We'll find out on who in a minute. David Arquette comes to town basically and is captured as a criminal by Sheriff Hunt.
Right, because some guy comes to the sheriff. He's like, this weirdo just rolled into the bar.
Chicory, his deputy.
Oh, it is Chicory that says that?
Although
okay.
he's not called a deputy in this movie. He's called like the backup sheriff.
Something.
It's funny how he's not called a deputy. And we don't even realize that Chicory is a person of authority because he's presented.
See, like I said, they call him backup deputy.
And he comes into Sheriff Hunt's office like a homeless man asking for soup, and then we find out this bum is the backup sheriff.
Deputy.
Oh, he's the backup deputy. He's not even the deputy. That's so funny.
Is Nick the deputy?
He must be. We'll have to find out. We can go to the wiki. Yeah. So anyway, in the interplay between Chicory and Sheriff Hunt is just great throughout this whole movie. And
calls him old man, which is kind of silly. Not silly, but Sheriff Hunt's not really no young chicken himself.
And Chicory is this character who's been in the war and he has a lot of knowledge. The Civil War, I would assume. This story takes place in 1890s territory.
What about the French Indian War? Or French?
No, that would have been like the 1700s.
Okay.
I think. And throughout the whole movie, this Chicory is kind of asking these. He's talking about are there actual fleas in flea circuses at one point? And
right.
He has a very childlike attitude about the world, and it's just goofy and fun. And I don't know. It lends itself to he's like the comic relief,
right?
But in the best of ways. It's not corny. He's one of the best characters in this film.
I think they're all great. I'm gonna end up saying one of the best characters about all four of those main characters.
And then in the same light, that's our introduction to those characters. And then Mr. Bruder, Matthew Fox, I love his introduction. He goes into the Learned Goat, which is the saloon in town. asks for a drink, and then he goes up to the piano
yeah.
player who's sleeping, and he says he's just trying to get him to play a tune, and there's this hilarious exchange where the piano player's
It's
like
3 cents for one song,
3 cents for one
a dime
song.
for 3.
And he's like, Bruder's like, why does it get more expensive the more songs you play? And he's like, because I get more tired the more
Right.
songs I play. And then he ends up paying a dime for, or I think he only pays, I don't know what
He gives
pays,
him a dime.
He
I
pays
think.
a dime for songs, and then this piano player whose pillow is on his piano, he flips the sign over, and on the back it says starting fee one drink.
drink,
You know,
yeah.
it's just hilarious. It's just weird, and there's just weird stuff like that. But it's not like,
It's
again,
not goofy.
and you're in like horror movie mode, so it's
Right.
like, this is weird that this is happening, and it just goes to develop the world.
Yeah,
more,
there is
I
a
would
lot of
say.
world building in this.
Yes, there's a lot. I mean, most of the movie is world building, honestly, until we're on the road with the characters. Yeah, and so this part of the movie, David Arquette is captured by Sheriff Hunt. Real badass scene where he confronts David Arquette and kind of gets him to admit that he's a robber and a
Shoots him in
murderer.
the foot.
David Arquette has
the
buried
leg.
he's buried the remains of the people that they were murdering at the beginning of the film outside the town, but Chicory caught him, and so they know. What happens now is David Arquette's going to be held in this jail cell. Mr. O'Dwyer, his wife, who again, Mr. O'Dwyer,
Samantha.
Samantha.
And Samantha.
And I'm trying to Patrick Wilson. His wife is a doctor, so she's called to the jail to perform surgery, get the
Keep
bullet,
him alive so
get the
he
bullet
can-
out. Yep, so he can hang.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. You know, they want to keep him alive so that he can be hanged, basically.
We're not going to be able to cover much of anything in this discussion concerning all the nuances that the dialogue has,
Right.
but please just don't take our word for it. Go find out for yourself. The dialogue in the first part of this movie is, I think,
The
exceptional.
whole movie.
Yeah, but especially just in this world building,
Yes,
it's so
yeah.
quirky and fun, and I was just like laughing out loud in some areas because of how absurd it is. Like Chicory's playing checkers with I think it's the deputy.
Yeah, Nick.
And Nick is like the best at checkers, and he's just like, he just keeps forgetting what moves he's making and asking why Nick is so
Right.
good at checkers, and it has nothing to do with the plot, but that's why this movie is good, because it's not plot based writing at all. It's character based writing.
Right.
Anyway,
So,
the cannibals end up coming to town.
does it ever say why?
No.
Were they following?
No. Yes.
They're following
they followed
Purvis,
David
Buddy.
Arquette because he defiled their grave,
Right.
and
they take him,
They take him. They take the
take
horses in the stable.
the horses, and they take Mrs. O'Dwyer, and they take Nick, the deputy,
Right.
because they're left to watch them while Sheriff Hunt and Chicory go do
Yeah.
something else, and then they kill one of the stable boys very
Yeah,
brutally.
this reminded me, and I don't want to keep making comparisons to Wes Anderson. Nothing like him.
Yeah,
but
what?
the very swift, like no soundtrack, the very swift way that this boy is executed out of nowhere. It's like shoo, shoo, shoo. There's like a bunch of quick cuts to like his throat getting cut. and,
Yeah,
like, it
okay.
reminds me of that idea.
I guess.
Anyway, so and from here on out, obviously Arthur O'Dwyer is very upset that his wife is gone.
Right.
Mind you, though, he is on crutches and he can't walk. So it astounded me. I was like, is this guy really gonna make this journey?
Well, yeah, because they get kind of like a hunting party together. They're like, we're gonna go
Yep.
get her back.
Yep.
And it basically it's meant to be Sheriff Hunt and Chicory.
Yep.
And Arthur's like, you can't stop me. I'm going.
Right.
That's my wife.
Yep.
And then this is all happening at the saloon, and
There's
Matthew Fox,
There's an Indian character that's saying
Right.
like, you're never gonna kill them. They're way
troglodytes.
they're
He calls them.
troglodytes. You don't have a chance. Making them sound real ominous.
And this is when Bruder is like, well, I guess if it's Indians, I better go, because he's like, I'm the best at killing Indians, basically.
I've killed a ton of them.
And we later find out that maybe he's going for an ulterior motive, because Arthur says like that he's always kind of had the hots for his wife.
Oh,
Did you catch
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
So like maybe he's going to try to like be the hero, win her back type of thing.
Yeah, we do have a confrontation though where Bruder kind of acknowledges that he was being an asshole.
Yeah.
So that could be. You're right. And there's a bunch of minor characters that come in this saloon scene that they build the world, but they're not gonna, like the mayor. How his wife, there's the mayor and his wife, and the mayor is like an idiot, and his wife is the one that's pulling the strings. None of it really matters, but it's like more characters,
Right?
So from this point forward, Patrick Wilson, Arthur O'Dwyer, Kurt Russell, the sheriff, Matthew Fox, the womanizer, mercenary Indian killer, and then Richard Jenkins as the backup deputy will head out on a quest to rescue.
Right, and during this period, there's really not a whole lot that like actually happens. Like they have a run-in with like a wolf one night. You don't even see the wolf.
Yeah.
They have a run-in with some supposed bandits, robbers that we later find out probably aren't, but they might be. It's kind of ambiguous.
And throughout this, I mean, and this is like a good hour of the movie.
Yeah.
Is the journey, and there's nothing like crazy that happens, but it's all about the relationships that develop between these four characters. They're all so different.
This is where one of my favorite parts of the movie happens. Like they're sleeping one night and Chicory kind of wakes up and kind of like startled, and he's like, "Hey, sheriff," and the sheriff wakes up. He's like, "I've been thinking." He's like, "How am I supposed to read a book in a bathtub?"
Yeah.
And the sheriff's like, what are you talking about? He's like, "I can't read a book in a bathtub. Whenever I do, I always get the pages wet."
Yeah.
And
they have this conversation about how to do that.
And, they come up with a solution of...
Why don't you get a music stand?
Right. And
it's so silly. But,
right. But it's awesome at the same time.
Yeah. Bruder is he's kind of a savage. He sets this perimeter around the camp every night, and he says, if you hear the bell jingle, there's like bells on these strings, just get up and shoot.
Right,
Don't
no
even
matter
ask
what
questions.
it is.
And they're kind of like, well, what do you mean? It could be like anybody. He's like, if they're coming into a camp and not announce themselves, you shoot them. And later, he kind of, I feel like they really get on him for being such a brute. Because he kills somebody. He ends up killing some innocent people.
Right.
Arguably innocent, and then he'll get attacked, and,
Right, yeah, this is where the people attack him. This was another really good part. So, like, they wake up one night. Is it O'Dwyer wakes up and...
Well, Bruder's getting attacked.
Right,
He's
Bruder,
being stabbed.
Yeah, in the shoulder.
Yeah.
And so O'Dwyer kills him, and then, a bunch of other people take off with their horses.
Yeah.
And going back into the world building, this is where Bruder's like, they couldn't have taken all of them. What's his horse's name?
The horses. Oh, yeah.
I forget, but it's something like...
It's Saucy.
It's Saucy,
It's
yeah.
Saucy. It's something like Sir Saucy.
Yeah,
and
he's like, Saucy would never let a grimy savage on her or something.
And sure enough, Saucy is laying very injured.
Right.
They're like, oh, looks like Saucy resisted after all. And so there's... In
the
first scene where we see emotions from Bruder,
right?
This is kind of a sad scene.
Yeah, you can see Matthew Fox did a good job. You can see how sad he is, and like he walks over and he's like, "Thank you for your service."
He says, "Thank you for your service," and he shoots his. But he gets tearful, and you can in this scene you can tell this is the only living thing he like cares about.
Right.
His family was killed by Indians. We learn that's why he hates. He's killed like 160 of them. We don't find that out until the end, and yeah, this is the only living thing that he probably loves, and he has to kill it. So that's good. Stuff like that, I feel like it's kind of a staple in darker Western movies, is to
killing
have
the horse.
Just to have these moments of like really powerful revelation and like emotion. And I want to highlight really the biggest component of this journey through the desert is that Patrick Wilson, now especially now that they don't have a horse, is fighting his leg, fighting disease the whole time, and he has to travel alone a lot of the time.
Yeah, because they carry on, and he hurts his leg again, and they're like, we're gonna have to cut it off. And this is a good piece of acting by Patrick Wilson when he's like,
this is when
he's like, no, like he like starts freaking out. He's like, it's my leg, it's my choice. And so he sets it right. They set the leg.
Yeah, they give him opium. They have opium from his wife's med kit, and they hammer his leg to set it because Chicory is.
And then they leave him.
Yep.
And they say they're gonna leave, like a trail for him to follow.
Right. And even before that, without the horses, Patrick Wilson was following from behind. They were leaving rocks for him to follow. And
he could still kind of see him.
Right.
But...
And there's a lot of isolation happening and I was just thinking about you have to travel alone at night, like just using rocks to navigate, and you're like crippled. Like that's pretty intense, you know. And then there's a scene where one of the only orchestrated scenes, he's just standing on top of this big hill, and there's these strings, and it's just like you really feel the weight of his toil. And but he just wants his wife back, and so he could have gangrene, but he doesn't care. And anyway, so that there's a lot of like back and forth. He's traveling, they're traveling. He catches up with them at night and camps with them. And then eventually, though, it gets too bad. They set his leg. He passes out for a while, and they go
because while he's passed out, the three, Chicory, Bruder, and Sheriff Hunt, end up getting to the lair,
the Valley of the Starving Man,
the troglodytes,
and the film does a good job of signaling when they get there. From the beginning of the film, there were skulls on the walls of this like valley, and we see them again.
Do they hear any of the whistling?
They do, yeah, they do. And so we get that ominous whistle again. And to put it simply and briefly, they try to go through this valley and end up getting completely assailed,
ambushed. Yeah, they catch arrows and rocks.
Yeah, Bruder goes ahead, and they catch up to him, and they see that there's a cave. It's
elevated,
up on a cliff, so there's no way to get to it. And then very swiftly, mind you, we've spent about an hour and a half building up with these characters. They're like desecrated very quickly. Bruder immediately, like it happens like that.
He gets his like fingers cut off.
Yeah,
by
he takes an arrow and a tomahawk, and like it's so quick. And the sound design here is excellent because it's just like whoomp, and he's like crippled immediately. And then he makes his last stand, and it's like they leave him some dynamite, but I don't know if he gets to use it.
Yeah, no, he doesn't.
He's basically just like, leave me the dynamite, I'll take as many
There's
as I
a great
can.
line, he's like, I'm too vain to be a cripple. So he's basically saying, I'm going to sacrifice myself, I'll try to take out as many as I can. And as soon as they walk away, one runs up to him and chucks a tomahawk at him, and he manages to get a shot off at him. But, that's it. He only takes out one, so you're expecting him to kind of make this heroic stand, and he doesn't.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's cool.
It is cool.
It's realistic.
And, this is the part of the movie where I just didn't really know what was going to happen. And then very quickly, Sheriff Hunt and Chicory are captured. They try to fight, but they're shot with arrows. They're knocked out. They're pulled up into the cave. And
this is where it gets wild.
They're reunited with Mrs. O'Dwyer.
Nick,
the sheriff,
and
the deputy.
They already, and then they say that...
they ask, where's Buddy, and they're like, they ate him,
right?
And I'm like, oh, okay. So now they're in cages, and I'm like, well, this is like pretty
is what Green Inferno should have been.
That's what I was thinking the whole time. That's so funny. I was like, you know what, Eli Roth needs to look at this as a good example of a cannibal horror film. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I was literally thinking the same thing. So
because this is where one of the most violent... I was gonna say violent scenes of the movie. Violent scenes like in a long time.
I've seen in a while.
Yeah,
very masterfully done.
So the troglodytes show up and they pull Nick out.
Well, and before they do that, the chief, who has like these tusks coming out of his face, will scream, and that guttural banshee scream comes out, and it's so scary because we're like, how are they making that sound? Are they just inhuman? And then they pull. So
they pull Nick out, and this whole time, Sheriff Hunt's saying stuff like, we're gonna avenge you. We gotta.
He's like, wake up. He's like, wake up.
Oh
Nick, wake up.
And then Nick wakes up they're scalping him.
They take his clothes off.
They scalp him. It's a
very brutal scalping.
They shove his scalp into the back of his throat with like a bone, like. Well, they like push it in,
and then they pound a stake into his throat.
Yeah, to keep it back there. And then they flip him upside down.
So we're looking at like his ass, basically.
Yeah. So there's two troglodytes holding each of his legs, and then the main one,
the chief,
and he just takes a cleaver,
to
the bone tomahawk, takes the bone tomahawk to his groin, and you just like the performance by whoever played Nick. Even though it's just yelling, it's very
like
effective.
Muffled, throaty, because he's like choking.
It's
on his
very
own scalp.
effective.
And he. What did you say? He just hammers
a couple times
into this guy's. I would assume
groin.
It's like and then he like will.
They pull him apart.
They split him in half,
and his guts spill out. And he's yelling the entire time until his guts spill out.
Brutal.
I just looked it up. I want to give credit to this guy's name is Evan Johnigan. Keat, Jonig Keat, Evan
the
Jonig
Nick,
Keat.
yeah.
Yeah, I just
It's brutal.
Yeah.
So that I don't know. I think it speaks for itself. I don't. I was astounded. That's not the last brutal thing that's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, and so he's done for, and they're kind of not happy about it. There's a scene where
they're eating him, and then the Sheriff Hunt and Chicory try to come up with like some kind of Scooby-Doo plan to get themselves out.
Right. They end up using the opium they have left to poison
their
some of the
whiskey or
savages.
something,
Yeah.
right? And they're
This
acting like they're
scene-
drinking it.
This scene was goofy. This was the only scene in the movie I wasn't really on board with because like how would they're like fighting over they put on this act. Chicory and the sheriff are like fighting over the flask with the opium in it. Like when the savages come in because they want the savages to take the cannibals
Right.
to take the opium. I don't see how the cannibals would even know what was going on. Why would they care?
They
about
could see
the
that they're
flask?
drinking something,
Yeah.
I guess, but whatever.
It's not the worst thing ever. But so one of them will die from the opium. One of them passes out.
Right, which is kind of weird because Samantha announces that. She's like, that one will die, that one
Yeah,
will pass out, that one will be
know.
unaffected. I was like, that was kind of weird. Like, how
Yeah.
does she know that?
Well, she's like
Spent
the
time with
doctor,
them.
but like I don't know.
Yeah.
She also tells us that there's 12 cannibals total, 12
Right.
men and 2 pregnant females who are deaf and blind.
Right.
And that's cool when we see them. But
So they're kind of counting down, like, how many have we killed?
they're trying to get rid of as many as they can so that when Patrick Wilson shows up, he can finish
Right.
them off. And I'm just thinking like, there's no way, They end up getting rid of some of them, and then really the rest of the film is Patrick Wilson going Rambo.
Yeah.
With a crippled
He's
leg.
kind of crawling his way, and he kills one of them. And he notices like the piece of jewelry. It's actually a piece of bone.
There's something in the throats of these things.
Yeah.
And if you didn't catch it earlier, when Bruder is about to make his last stand, he flips one of the natives over and he pokes the cannibals, and he pokes him in the belly with his rifle. And if you notice, something squirts out of his throat.
Right.
And that's kind of a little foreshadowing at what I was like, what is that? As it turns out, Patrick Wilson cuts this thing out, and it's an instrument that is like
Grafted
integrated
into
with
their
throat. Yeah, and that's what allows them to scream like that. So at this point, the film kind of demystifies its antagonists, right?
Yeah, and I think the thought process behind him, like noticing that and then putting it into his mouth, is a little weird.
Yeah.
like, but
But it was cool because he ended up using it as a call to
Right.
kind of lure them and kill
because
them.
he's got a gun. You know what I mean? He
Yeah.
can. There was one it's kind of bizarre fight scene where, him and one of the troglodytes kind of are like 10 feet apart maybe, and the troglodyte goes to shoot him with his arrow, and he shoots the bow and breaks the bow.
Yeah, this is...
And then he's like, he has to reload his gun. There's like this sense of like not urgency, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like the troglodyte like walks over and grabs his tomahawk, and he's just kind of like lumbering over to him. And like Patrick Wilson's trying to like reload his gun, and like he's like right on top of him before
Yeah.
he kills him. And it's like kind of weird because there's like not even like a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
But it kind of like makes that tension. You're like, what's happening?
Yeah, and then there's no soundtrack happening.
Right, yeah,
so
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like the sounds of them jostling. It has a very old-fashioned feel, right? Anyway.
And so like he gets up to where Bruder had died, and he sees like that cave, and doesn't he like deduce there's probably a back door? Like you're supposed to think that this character is pretty intelligent because he knows how to write.
Well, he
and
actually says,
read.
"I'm going to try the back door."
Right.
I don't know how he ends up getting up there.
I'm sure there's just like a slope that leads up to
Yeah,
it.
and yeah,
and then this
we-
is where it cuts back to
the final scene.
the inside the cages
Where they're-
with Chicory and Hunt.
Yeah.
And
Don't they open up Sheriff Hunt's? I'm going to go to the scene. They open up the cage to take either Chicory or the sheriff because they know that they poisoned them. So they're going to take.
well, Hunt kind of rushes him. He's going to try to fight him.
Kurt Russell rushes out of the cage and he gets
Overpowered, messed up.
He gets messed up
Yeah.
here.
So they knock him down. They hold him down. They push Chicory back in, and then they cut open his belly.
And they had thrown the flask of moonshine on the fire.
Right.
There's a fire in the middle of this room. It's a metal flask. They cut open
his
Kurt
belly,
Russell.
like a side of his stomach.
And as soon as they showed the flask, I knew where it was going, and I was like, "Oh no!"
Yeah, and they shove the burning hot flask into him. And he spends the rest of the film, which, like, there's probably, like, 20, 15 minutes left. But he spends the rest of the film with this burning hot flask sticking out of his stomach.
Brutal.
It's
and
brutal, but
they
it's kind of
shoot him.
funny at the same time.
The cannibal has this repeater rifle, too, and he tries to shoot him in the crotch, but he can't reload it. So when he does reload it, he ends up shooting him in the chest. This is when Patrick Wilson like shows up and starts like beating ass, you know.
Right. One thing I want to point out real quick about Chicory during this scene, though, is he starts saying the same things
You will
that Kurt
be
Russell.
avenged.
He's like, "Y'all," because Sheriff Hunt says to Chicory, he's like, none of that was true. He's like, if I was dying, I would want to hear that.
Well, what he was telling Nick was the cavalry's on the way.
The cavalry's on the way. We're gonna kill every last one of them. And Chicory he's like, the cavalry's coming. We're gonna kill all of them. It's hilarious.
Anyway, yeah. So Kurt Russell gets messed up. Thankfully, Patrick Wilson comes and kind of lays down the hellfire here.
Right, and that gives Sheriff Hunt the opportunity to get up and fight back because Patrick Wilson comes in and he starts shooting.
So,
you just play the scene, but when he shoots the repeating rifle, the bullet falls out of the chamber and falls into his mouth.
Yeah,
that's kind of funny.
Yeah, and he spits it out.
Right.
Yeah, the chief has Kurt Russell on the ground, and the way Kurt Russell just does away with this chief is just badass.
Yeah,
I'm trying to see here.
He gets the bone tomahawk.
Oh, he's able to grab the tomahawk and cut off the chief's toes.
Yes.
Chief falls down, and then he just has this mano-a-mano face-to-face moment with the chief here.
This movie's got a lot of like Mortal Kombat type stuff going on.
Oh, and then Patrick Wilson shoots the chief, and then
he hacks
Kurt Russell gets face-to-face with this chief and just straight up hacks through his neck.
It takes him like 3 swings though, and he just knocks it completely off, and it's badass.
It's very satisfying. And then he just gets up.
And then he falls.
His stomach is slit open. The flask in it.
The flask.
Brutal. It's brutal. And
then this is kind of where the film wraps up.
Yep.
We see this exchange between
husband and wife reunited. There's not really much more to the movie.
Right.
Now that it has kind of reached its climax, I think it doesn't really have anything to offer anymore.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, no, there's the line. But I mean, after they leave this cave.
Right. Because O'Dwyer talks to him. He's like, are you going to make it? He's like, no, just leave me. He's like, by my count, there's still 3 left. Leave me the gun.
They know about the town, so I'm going to kill them so they can't hurt anybody anymore.
Right. So he's like, you guys, he's like, go now.
Yeah.
And then he kind of, this is my favorite line.
I'm going to find it, and then we're going to play it. Chicory. Yeah.
Chicory and Hunt have an exchange because earlier in the film, Bruder says to all 3 of them, he's like, you're all weak because they're like, why? He's like, well, Sheriff Hunt, you have a wife. O'Dwyer, you have a wife. And Chicory, you're weak for, because his wife's a widow. Or he's a widower because his wife's dead. So he's like, you're all weak. Having women makes you weak, basically. And there's a great line before that we kind of missed when Chicory's leaving. He goes and visits his wife's grave, and he says,
"Well, I gotta go."
He's like, I'll either see you back here when I get back, or I'll see you up there.
Yeah, I gotta go rescue the. Yeah,
right.
And here we have the final exchange between Chicory and the sheriff
Hunt.
As he's about to be left for dead, and this is what is said. Let me turn this up here.
Your deputy. Talk with you. Good idea. Say goodbye to my wife. I'll say hello to yours. Yes, sir.
And if you didn't catch that, the sheriff says, "You say goodbye to my wife, and I'll say hello to yours." And at that point in the movie, it just hit really hard. I was like, man, that's powerful.
And just Chicory's response, just yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, dang.
And there's another cool line that Chicory keeps repeating throughout this film. It's Patrick Wilson will be, or not, Kurt Russell will be doing something like laying stones, And
Oh,
Chicory
yeah.
will say, well, I figure that's the duty of the backup
Yeah.
deputy is to lay stones. Here he says, well, I figure it's the duty of the backup deputy to stay and have this conversation.
Right.
Like with you before you die. You know?
Yeah, there's I mean, I guess like after you said that this, the director I'm gonna forget it again, S. Craig Zahler, like that he's written
Yeah, this is
Western
him.
books. Like,
Oh.
you can tell like a lot of this is very well written dialogue
Yeah.
that you would imagine reading in a book. I feel like.
But even not everybody that writes novels is good at
Right.
writing dialogue, and this guy I just think is, because most of it really sticks with me. Nothing's really like that's like a one-liner, but like most of it's not even one-liners. It's just kind of really quirky, really believable, really minimalistic.
Yeah.
I think that's the key for me.
Yep.
Is minimalistic dialogue. And you know, from that point on, we don't even get to see Kurt Russell die. We just hear the gunshots
yeah.
as they leave. Husband and wife exchange a kiss, and then
Chicory throat.
Chicory
he
had picked
grabbed
up a rock. Just
we
in
should,
case
we should talk about real quick because you said when you see the pregnant women,
Oh, right.
because they walk past the pregnant women.
This was sweet.
And it's either Chicory or Dwyer. It's like just leave them
When they're leaving the cave,
because their eyes have
stakes.
like I
in
think
them.
they're tusks.
Oh,
Like because the dude's got tusks.
so remember they we know they're deaf and blind,
Right.
And yeah, they have these stakes or tusks hammered into their eye
Yep.
sockets.
And it looked like there was something wrapped around their mouths.
Yeah,
too.
and they're just laying pregnant and naked on this stone slab, and it's a very like kind of Mad Max how like
Yeah.
the wives are just like
Yep.
vessels, man. And they you know they could have killed them, and Chicory's just like leave them, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just that last brutal statement, you know.
And then the last thing we see is Chicory had grabbed a rock in case he needs to defend himself, and he just kind of tosses it to the side, and that's it.
He tosses it in the mud where it sticks, and I think it's a similar scene to the beginning when we see the skull fall off the pyre, and
Yeah.
then Bone Tomahawk rolls. Here, the rock gets thrown in the mud, makes a big clunk, and then credits roll.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's kind of like a full circle, like
Right.
throwing in the stone. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know if there's like
So that's the movie.
yeah.
I think one of the themes that jumped out to me while I was watching this, because, obviously there's a reason you make Patrick Wilson's character intelligent and crippled, because Kurt Russell at one point says, we're not going to out-muscle him. He doesn't say it like that, but he's he's like, the only advantage we have is that we're smarter than them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how Patrick Wilson, how O'Dwyer succeeds, is kind of this theme of like intelligence over brawn, or like man over nature, which is like that's like the basic Western theme is man over nature.
Well, and even it's not just man over nature, it's like a severely disabled man over nature,
which
but
is
he's
interesting.
still able to make the journey. And I don't know, we don't really find out what happens to him if he loses his leg or not, because they have to go back. It's not important, it's not important to the story. But the whole film, you're kind of just thinking, how are these four dudes gonna do this? And they don't all make it out, but they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a great story about companionship. The character building is great. It's violent, not really for most of the movie, but the end is very violent. It's very conservative with its violence, but it all comes at once, and it's like, man,
that scene where they killed Nick is still like,
yeah,
I was like, ugh,
I know,
like watching it.
That's gonna be like this. I feel like that when I watched that, I was like, this is a scene that people would like talk about.
Right.
Like, oh, the scalp.
I hope
scene.
people do talk about this movie.
Yeah. It's so new. This deserves so much more attention.
Right.
It's getting great reviews. I mean, even on IMDb, it has an 89 on Rotten Tomato.
Right.
7 out of 10 on IMDb. Even sites like IGN reviewed this movie. It's
Good review.
It's
probably.
getting a lot of love, and I think it deserves that. And I think it's a slow burn. I can understand why people wouldn't like it. But if you are patient and if you like movies that build slowly.
But it was, I mean, even within the slowness, it's still entertaining because of the characters and because of like the book in the bathtub scene. Or
Because they're not just going from point A to point B. They're learning about each other. They're engaging with each other, and we're learning about them. And they're not just fodder. Because that's another thing I was worried about. I was like, there's only 4 people.
Right.
This movie's gonna.
I was a little disappointed that Bruder died so quick.
Yeah.
But it was fitting for the way that he died, because he had been bragging about how good he was at killing in like the first
Yeah.
encounter they have, you know, and then the I'm too vain to be a cripple.
And I would have been disappointed if something like that wouldn't have happened, because I was hoping that the film was spending so much time making us love these characters just so it could tear us down.
Right.
And that's what a good story does, is it makes you fall in love with people, and then it takes them from you. Not all of them. It doesn't have to take all of them from you. But Kurt Russell, I liked his character a lot too, and he didn't make it, you know. And that
Maybe he did, dude. That's the
Maybe
sequel.
he did. Yeah,
Remember
Bone
Green
Tomahawk
Inferno,
2.
dude? The after credit scene.
Right.
Maybe, you know, he became a cannibal.
The satellite. Maybe we missed a satellite.
The satellite
shot.
image.
What
yeah.
I do want to say about the credits of this movie is there's a very entertaining original track.
Oh,
If you didn't listen
No,
to it,
I
I
didn't
want to
listen
play
to
a
it.
little bit. It's like 4 brave men rode into the. It's really funny, and it's like a final comedic statement. Let's see. It's basically, it's just a very silly, he's kind of got this yodely voice, and he's
Right.
just singing about what the film was about. 4 men ride into the desert. They didn't know about, I think the song says, the ancient race. But, you know, it's goofy. And
I didn't know. That's kind of cool that they had an original song put together.
yeah, and if you think Bone Tomahawk is a goofy title, it is. And the film's kind of goofy. But it's also a good Western, and a good horror story, too, I think.
Did you catch the song that they played after that?
No.
No. Because I skipped to the end just to see if
There were any, like,
after
hidden
credit.
yeah.
And it actually played this song, which I think is one of the greatest American rock songs of all time.
Okay, I must have missed this.
I know I gave it months ago. I know you're trying to forget. I know I gave it months ago. I know you're trying to forget. I know I gave it, 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 months ago, go, gave it months ago, go, gave it months ago, go, gave it months ago, go, gave it, go, gave it, go, gave it, go, gave it, go, and you feel like, and you falling, 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 falling down.
Yeah, no, I must have missed that.
Yeah, I think that's like maybe because I don't know. I got like a different file or something, like with the exclusive deleted scene.
Do you think? Well, that's cool. I don't know. I think there's probably multiple interpretations of like what the director
What that
wanted to
means,
do,
and yeah.
So that's it. That's Bone Tomahawk, guys, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
highly recommend it.
We gotta get this wrapped up because I got somewhere to be.
Yep.
We're gonna take a couple days off for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone! Go eat lots of
Yeah.
lasagna as you do on Thanksgiving.
Yep.
The typical Thanksgiving meal, lasagna.
Next time, for the next podcast, we'll be coming at you with Krampus. Very excited.
We've been talking about this
We've
since
been
the
hyping it.
beginning.
Let's
since
see what
day
happens.
one, dude.
Yeah.
Go see Krampus. That comes out not this weekend, but the weekend after.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on when you're listening to this.
I'm hoping it'll
First
be
weekend of December.
Yeah, December 4th. I'm hoping it'll be a fun one. It's the day before my birthday. Let's party.
Yeah.
Send us a like on Facebook. Send us a follow on Twitter at Blood Feud Pod.
Send us a subscribe on YouTube
Yep.
at Blood Feud Podcast.
Leave a comment. As always, I'm Sam.
I'm Neil.
Have a good one, bud.
And go yourself.